Let's use this protocol. If you have a question that you would like to ask, please raise your hand and I will recognize you. And you may address your question to individuals or to the panel.
Some of us have seen Josh Fox's film, Gasland. In that film, it was stated that when someone's well, which had been for generations producing pure drinking water, suddenly had contamination because of a nearby gas well drilled, and the owner of the well went to the gas company, excuse me, and said, "You've polluted my well." And they said, "No, we didn't." And they were able to support that in court. Is that happening still? And is that possible? How can that be? You know, if it waddles like a duck,
that doesn't legally prove anything.
You know, circumstantial evidence would prove, should prove, in common sense court, that there is a direct connection between a well drilled 500 yards away and my well being contaminated.
Circumstantial evidence in American court of law doesn't prove anything, and when it does, it's usually the cases that are overturned by genetic testing on men that have been on death row for murders they didn't commit. I grew up near Quakertown, between Quakertown and Allentown, in the area pumped, mined by New Jersey Zinc in the 50s. And when I grew up, houses all around me had big signs, "New Jersey Zinc, pump my well dry." My father was a Quaker businessman. I said, "Dad, these people are going to get paid, aren't they, for their wells?" And he just looked at me and he said, "No." He said, "They won't have the lawyers that New Jersey Zinc has." And so that's absolutely what's happened. The April 2010 or 11, I don't read Time magazine, so it was years ago, but Time had a cover story on the frack area and the northern tier of Pennsylvania. And the centerfold was the Johnson farm near Wellsboro, Pennsylvania, who lost a number of cows from a frack return water pond leaking. They've been trashed by the energy industry. They signed a lease, and she spoke to a couple of the Quaker tours that I had for frack tours for Quakers and others from downstate. And you know, she said, "We have 4 children. One of them doesn't manage money well. They were going to be able to use this money to establish a trust for him, so when they die, you know, the Norman Rockwell, you know, attempt to do good." And the gas company said, "We'll build a road to the pad we're going to have," and then they said, "Oh, we can't. There's a wetland there." So they come with their trucks, and we're talking tractor trailers, hundreds of trucks in a week when they go to frack, of sand and water, right between their house and the barn. I mean, they used their farm lane to feed this pad. They had a frack water return pond, which are still legal in Pennsylvania, although Shell doesn't use them. Many of the major players have agreed not to. But this was East, which was the company Shell bought. So Shell now has responsibility for this. They had 7 calves born their first year, or 8. 5 of the 7 or 6 of the 8 were either stillborn or died immediately after birth, within the first 24 hours. They're an 80-year-old couple. They had a dairy farm before they had beef cattle. And you know, you don't lose 3/4 of your cattle. I mean, nobody does. You wouldn't have a farm. And they're just now, they have a lawyer, and they're just now talking with Shell about a settlement, which I'm sure will finally be fairly good, because I'm sure Shell wants it off their books. But they couldn't prove anything. First, they were sending the fetuses to Penn State, and Penn State was not helping at all. So then they sent them to Cornell, and the woman there was going to write a book, so she wasn't releasing any information because it had to be peer-reviewed and everything, because she was going to publish on it. So they finally have some of the documentation. But the devastation in the community, and Rebecca, if she was here, is from Dimmock. I think most people have heard of Dimmock, Pennsylvania. In Bradford County, there's Carol French, who's a dairy farmer, who's a wife, she and her husband are dairy farmers. Their daughter allergic to things, and why that's happening, I don't know, but we all know, more and more severe allergy issues in this day and age, and her daughter had to move away from home, and when she moved away, she got better. Okay, I don't know the Chafee side, but I mean, to prove something is very difficult and takes a lot of time, and circumstantial evidence does not do it. Now, luckily, there are trace elements that people are working on. Scientists and for environmental organizations are working on tracking like markers, that I don't understand. Okay, so that's my story. Thank you.
It costs extra, but if they put chemical taggants in, it's like an ID. It's very low cost. They can just put it in and they can tell exactly which well the chemicals are coming from. But they don't want to do it because guess what? They're going to be held accountable. But before all of this happened, our spring water is beautiful water. We were thinking of actually, for money, bottling it and maybe selling it. We looked into Pennsylvania law about that, and we were told we could not do that because we could not, because it was shale, and we couldn't. They couldn't certify the source of the water. So it works one way when you're trying to have bottled water, but the other way when they're polluting it, they take no accountability.
So you have to truck in water, potable water, because your wells are gone.
Many people do.
Let's move on to another question.
Tim, at the end of your talk, you mentioned something about the short-term benefit. Do you have anything to say about the boomtown syndrome, where past extraction industries, especially the last one, coal, got exemptions from everything?
I'm not sure quite what you're asking. The phenomenon I'm talking about is that boomtown boom and bust. That very clearly, gas development is similar to other resource extraction. There is a boom time, which what they're talking about here. But after that's over, what happens afterwards? And so, as a community made investments, or individual businesses, or individuals made investments that are specific only to that development, that when the activity goes away, the community's left worse off, or the diversity of the local business community and so on changes. That's the phenomenon.
Yes.
I just want to clarify. You made a statement about chemical tags.
Chemical taggant is, I think. I think if you Google chemical tag or chemical taggant, it's a low-cost tracking. You're the chemist.
What's the word?
It's a taggant. It's an impurity that's introduced that can be monitored by chemists in extremely low amounts. So if it's in the water, they can tell you where it came from.
So let's say a local, a state lawmaker, there is no law saying that the industry has to put these in right now, correct?
We tried.
So we need a law, is what you're saying.
Yes.
I'm running for office, state office.
Okay.
So I need to know about these things
Okay.
because I need to know what law I'm going to write next year to help you all out. My name's Charlie Hample. I'm running. I'm the state endorsed, county endorsed Democrat for the 97th district.
Great.
So that's why I'm here.
Great.
Question here.
Actually, I was so excited to see in the paper yesterday that this group was doing this. I'm Joanne DuBois Musselman, and I'm here on behalf of our Lancaster Unitarian Universalist Green Sanctuary Committee. I'm also the founder of Pennsylvanians Against Fracking. And Elaine Esch-App and Joanne DuBois Musselman, myself, have been working at this issue, very concerned, for 4 years now. And I have been telling everyone, we need to be very vigilant, we need to be, and I consider myself, the term now is a fractivist, ladies and gentlemen. And
some of you may have noticed when you came in, there is on the table some information, one on the pipeline that's coming through, or proposed to come through, and the second is an informational piece on Marcellus Shale fracking that was written by Elaine Esch, who is here also. And Elaine agreed to let us copy her piece that she prepared, so feel free to pick one up. Yes, ma'am.
Tim, I think you were at our fracking forum at London Grove meeting, is that? Yeah. Is there any work being done on the economics of citizens groups versus big commercial enterprises like this? Whether how the groups can fend off this kind of, on an economic level, how we can possibly have the money to fend off this kind of development?
There might be, but I'm not aware of it. That would be more, I hate to speak in kind of academic divisions, but that's the way academics work. That would be more on the kind of the political science side. What's the influence of, or sociology? What's the influence of big money on politics, and where does it flow? And I think it was Pennsylvania's Common Cause. There are a few other organizations that have looked at the flow of dollars. But your question reminds me of something else I forgot to mention as well too, and and that's the issue of that we have relatively good numbers on kind of wages, employment, and kind of the benefits. What no one has really been able to do so far is put dollar figures on what are the costs. And until we identify fully the costs, it can be big dollars of benefit, but without, if it's even bigger dollars of cost, it's not a good situation. And so the cost is something else that, there's a lot of anecdotes, there's a lot of discussion back and forth, but so far as I know, there have not been any robust studies that have looked at the overall costs.
I just want to mention that this meeting was a primary seat of the citizens' effort to respond to the 3 Mile Island accident. And we found out, there are many of us who are no longer asking whether it's fair that we often, have trouble standing up to these people. We know it's very, very difficult, but we still have to try, as these people can attest. But you're sitting in a very historic place even now.
I see on your fact sheet, increased bonding for wells so that PA taxpayers don't have to pay for closing the well. I would like to see a fee charge, I don't know how to go about it, set aside so when we have acid mine water from these, whatever it is, we have the money to clean it up so we don't have what we have with the old mines. That's something for the running. You can propose, set aside something. So when it goes wrong, which it will, one place, maybe 2 places, we have the money and they don't go bankrupt and we're stuck.
There actually is a requirement that they submit some documentation to the state, but that doesn't take in, the oil companies have to show that they're financially able to cover spills, but that doesn't say that 2 years later they're Enron or something, and all of a sudden what seemed to be a lucrative company.
Pay us now instead of maybe pay us later.
Right. I want to give people a chance to speak before some folks have a chance to speak a second time, so you have the floor.
There is money going in, there are fees being collected for cleanup. However, that money, thousands of dollars or millions of dollars, is going into the general fund right now. So it's not being held to clean up contaminated wells and such like that. A question I have is, I'm not sure if anybody here can address it. The issue of methane as global warming, I believe it's 30 to 100 times worse than carbon dioxide. And the timeline is, it depends on the timeline. But I'm not sure if do you know are they even monitoring for methane? Or
Well, they have to.
Well,
So, I hear a yes and a no.
Depends on what you call monitoring.
Yeah.
Do you want to speak?
Well, they flare wells to supposedly burn off the methane because that's supposed to be a better solution than just letting it loose. But when I went to the EPA, one of the gentlemen had taken, it wasn't an infrared camera, it was some different kind of camera where you could see not heat, but emissions coming off a compressor station. And there were there's all sorts of stuff coming off, especially the compressor stations, that is not being recorded. And it depends on whether you're downwind or upwind. I think Impact Pennsylvania has done an extensive piece on those kind of emissions. And you know, the companies can say whatever they want, but if we don't trust how they're monitoring, then I don't think that means anything.
We have a question over there.
There's a very good answer to that gentleman's question about cleaning up acid mine drainage. There is a stream in Elk County, Pennsylvania that was recently cleaned up, and it cost $12 million to build a purification plant on this stream. It's called the Bennett's branch of the Cinnamahoney Creek, and it was written up in the Pennsylvania Outdoor magazine within the last year. They have done some excellent articles on the fracking issue. Pennsylvania Outdoors magazine, and so the cost of cleaning up one of these streams from coal mining acid runoff is $12 million plus $200,000 a year for maintenance, and it works beautifully. And they now have 15 miles of Class A trout stream due to the purification, but $12 million to clean up one stream. So where's the money going to come from in the future for any kind of incidental damage from all the drilling that'll occur? We should be learning from the coal miners industry.
We learned a lot on environmental impact, but unfortunately we did not. Bob.
I would submit that you're being made a toxic waste dump. They are putting tremendous amount of water down, but they also put a tremendous amount of chemicals down there. And chemicals cost a lot of money when you buy them, but if you get the toxic waste that the oil companies and the chemical companies are disposing of, you can get them free. And I suspect that what they're doing is taking the toxic waste and putting it in there and calling it their fracking material. If you know that it works, they can disclose that if they patent it and prevent anybody else from using the same thing. But I don't think they can patent the toxic waste because they keep varying from day to day from any chemical and oil processing company. So I think you're becoming a toxic waste dump, and I think that's one of the issues you should be raising.
Let's pose that as a question.
Yeah,
do you as residents feel that that is happening, or that's an issue?
Yeah, absolutely. The industry has been all over the place on how much flowback they have, and flowback would be the amount of the 5 to 7 million gallons of water, sand, and chemicals they put to frack a single well. And just so you understand, a normal pad in Tioga County has 6 to 8 wells. They're only about 6 feet apart. So they move that big rig horizontally down the line, so because it costs so much to set it up. So in one pad, as you'll see in Bob's pictures, one pad is 10 or 20 acres, depending if they have water storage on it and other size things. And then, so if they're doing 5 to 7 million gallons of water in each one, and they're doing 8, that's 40 to 50 or 55 million gallons of water, of which 0.5% is chemicals, 3 or 4% is sand, and most of the rest is water. But that's an awful lot of chemicals. And so in the beginning, when people were worried about what was happening down below, they said, oh, or what was coming back up, they said, oh, don't worry, it mostly stays down there. And they were giving return rates of 20%. And then later they were saying, well, actually it gets up to 50%. So no one really knows how much, or they do, but it's not public information how much comes back. And they have the frac tank trucks you've seen that are sort of angular on the back, so they lift them up and haul them down the highway with no clearance at all. One got stuck on the top of Old 15 there right above Williamsport because they have such low clearance because they're so heavy and they're full. And so now they're saying they're going to use them over again, and that'll take care of the waste. Well, we won't generate new, we'll use the return. But Professor Ingrafia from Cornell said they really can't do that because when they maximize the pressure down, They have all kinds of agents to make sand soluble in water, which all of us who played at the beach knows isn't possible. So they have all these surfactants and all these gels to make the sand go with the water to the finest fissures created at the maximum pressure. And then he said they inject counter chemicals to undo the slippability of the sand so it stays lodged in the fissures as the water comes back as they release the pressure. And so this was speaking years ago in Elmira, but he said he admitted he wasn't up to date on, because he no longer works for the industry, but he said it made no sense to him how they could claim they were going to reuse it when chemicals have been put in to lessen the effect of the chemicals that would make it work. So that's just one story from Dr. Ingraffi.
I just wanted to add to that. Elaine Esch was saying last week, a lot of that water that goes underneath the ground falls below the water table, so it's removed from the water cycle. So that's water that is being removed from the earth that we use.
Hopefully below.
My question is, what is being done to protect the aquifer? Can anybody on the panel do that? I spent many years controlling and monitoring the water, potable water, your drinking water, for a city and and monitored steelworks. So this, I understood, was that when the aquifer is destroyed, you cannot restore it. And I'd like to know what's being done about it.
Nothing. Right. They put the pressure of the chemicals going down is so very high, it stays down, it goes through the water table, they say it goes underneath, but the thing is it doesn't get to the underneath without going through it. It's sort of pretty basic, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know. And as we all know, the water table, the aquifer, is a closed system, it does not cleanse itself. It would be better to pour it into the river, because a river can cleanse itself. Eventually.
One other point on that. PSR is a wonderful source. PSR, Physicians for Social Responsibility, and Philadelphia is a very active chapter. And I just went to one of their presentations a couple weeks ago, and one interesting point on that a chemist made, and maybe you'll agree or not, but he said Pennsylvania doesn't truly have an aquifer the way Nebraska, the Ogala aquifer in Nebraska is it, or in Saudi Arabia or under Israel, where they're pumping what, as Margaret said, are dead aquifers, water that was formed millions of years ago, and are being recharged at a very slow rate because they're under areas of limited rainfall. Pennsylvania really does not have an aquifer in the same sense. Our aquifer does get replenished and does flow out. So the water from the rains and the mountains of north central Pennsylvania and upstate New York goes to the Delaware, the Susquehanna, the Allegheny, and it isn't a closed sort of or semi-closed system the way a true aquifer is in some of the other areas, or even in Texas and Southern California, where they're draining water that was put there millions of years ago and is hardly being replenished.
When I moved to, my wife and I moved to Lancaster County in 1999, I discovered pretty quickly that our underlying rock is limestone, it's fractured, and it's all contaminated. So if you're not testing your drinking water, you should. But it's a different issue with fracking because the water is going down several miles. It's going below the aquifers. It's going below the aquifers, and it's when it comes back up that you have a problem. When it comes back up, it leaks into the aquifers, then you get contamination of the aquifers. Yes?
Thanks, Ed. Margaret, you mentioned that the strategy that these big companies use is frack the community first. And Beth, you mentioned that, you quoted Rebecca as saying, try and come up with like a soundbite or something that we all can agree on. Well, already they're fracking the southern Lancaster County area where I live, and there's a good article on the first page of the Perspective section today from some of my neighbors down in southern Lancaster County. So in your experience, can you help us to know and learn what to do to unify us, from your experience?
Good question.
So what do I rest on? I rest on a family that's lived in the same place and loves the same things. I rest on my Quaker faith, where we have a long practice. I mean, Quakers we know how to watch each other's backs and take care of each other while others of us are thrown into jail. And so it's find the commonality and lower the outrage machine. When activists who have an overarching common interest are fighting over what happened in our community, a cartoon figure that was going to be on a brochure, that we just rendered, you know, it became about artists' rights. When rights come up, we all get like kind of spiky. I mean, even today I had to sign a video thing and I kind of like had to change it, you know? Because you just get so irritated living in this environment. So just hold each other tenderly. Do a lot of listening. In the worship this morning, there was, you know, turn the bullhorns into ear trumpets.
Ear horns.
Ear trumpets.
So, you know, it's very hard. I guess look for the commonality first, and look for the big picture, big bridge thing, and don't sweat the small stuff, and just know that if you're divided as a community, you're allowing that you're just allowing yourselves to be fractured.
I think it's very important to note there is no fracking in Lancaster County. There are proposed pipelines. Right. And if anything, if we see the editor's letter from the New Era and from the Lancaster Intelligencer Journal, this is bringing our community together. The Lancaster environmental community, whether it's the Conservancy, Farmland Trust, hiking, biking clubs, Boy Scouts, Girl Scout troop leaders have this. I think this issue will bring Lancaster County together.
Can I just, there's a book called Getting to Yes.
He's got a comment.
I would like to add on to that. I think part of the reason that the areas of Marcellus, you know, there's a kind of conflict and kind of differences of opinion is the onset of that activity happened very quietly. And so it was landowner by landowner, the gas company would come, negotiate leases, and so there was not a sharing of public information. By and large, there are very few, if any, formal public meetings. There was not, the activity was by and large was legal under state regulations, and so there was not the equivalent of a local zoning variance where there's a public hearing and a chance for the public to speak. There's no opportunity for the public at all to speak in these communities. It just happened, and by the time it happened, then it was done. You do have the opportunity here,
it's
at least.
happening right now
Right.
in southern Lancaster County. They're going door to door, not all doors. And so some people know about it, some people don't.
So the key you got to think about with that is two things I would argue. Is one is share information as clear and transparent as possible, so everyone's working for the same element. You know, your comment about the leasing rate. You know, some people were getting $5 an acre, others were getting neighbors were getting $3,000 to $5,000 an acre. Because of differences of information. So share information and provide as many public opportunities for people to talk and to vent and to listen as possible.
I just want to address this also for a minute.
Can I ask?
It's not another question.
I would like to go to another question.
There's a book called Getting to Yes, which is very helpful in focusing everybody on the issue. It's called Getting to Yes.
I have no question, but I have a suggestion which you, the second panel, brought up, which is the fracking of the people. And that sounded exactly what happened in Germany. So this is just the beginning of a tidal wave, and I would like to alert everybody that it is just water and gas, but it will eventually be all of us that are affected. And therefore, this is a kind of a war that we are talking about, and it is worldwide. And I think we all have to wake up. If we talk about it, we are considered strange, even with family. We have to be able to totally, accept fear as being our partner, as being our friend, and money money which is really not a real thing, being our enemy. And therefore, anything that has to do with money is not acceptable anymore. And how we do it, I leave it up to you.
We have about 5 minutes. I'm sure some of the folks who are here would be glad to stay and answer some questions perhaps, but they have come a long way. So let's go for about 5 more minutes and then we will officially adjourn. Yes.
So, excuse me, Susan Leinberger from the League of Women Voters. We have a very active website, PALeagueofWomenVoters.org, and we have been working for well over 3 years against fracking. What are the implications of installing the pipeline through Pennsylvania?
Is there anyone here? These folks are not likely to know much about that.
Well, I can talk in general terms. I can talk in general terms. Pipelines aren't just transit. They're not just transit, they're a warehouse. So the gas is stored under pressure, and they release it when it's low priced out of the well, and they pump it out the other end or to, you know, into the ship that goes to China or whatever at the high price. So when you hear arguments about how vital it is for transport, know that they're also getting warehouse benefits from this. So securing in Texas, where the land doesn't freeze in the winter or whatever, there's a lot of pipelines that run over the surface of the land. It's not actually underground. And there's some 50, 60-year-old pipelines there that because there's been so many buyouts of different pipelines, different gas companies, they've actually lost the maps. They don't really know where these pipelines are anymore. And God forbid that one of the wells stops, is poorly drilled or something, and they give up on the well. That's where all the problems are, is when there's a bad well. But if they've lost the pipeline, I mean, there was a farmer who was brush hogging to clear some land, and he didn't know that he had a pipeline there, and he blew himself up with, you know, first-degree burns. Just about, I mean, it's amazing that he even lived. Just total irresponsibility like that needs to be curbed, Mr. Running for office.
I have 2 questions in the back. You first, you second. Yes, first.
Hi, my name is Debbie Hauk. I live down in the southern end also. Excuse me if I sound a little ignorant, I got here late. I'm wondering if there's any studies of how this is going to impact me. I'm not concerned about the money. I'm not concerned about any of that. I'm concerned about my health, my family's health, 10 to 20 years down the road. Does anybody know of any studies that these companies have done in other towns? I came from up north, way up by the Canadian line, and Algoma Steel went under that water, and everybody in my family and all my friends died of something horrific, and it was all through water and well. And I'm just wondering, does anybody, I saw an article in Oprah a couple months back, and it talked about fracking and all the implications that come with it.
No one really knows. The National Institutes of Health has had some forums on that. Geisinger's gearing up a research study. Pitt has some folks in their public health department. It's an issue everyone's talking about, but I'm only aware of studies that are in the early stages or planning stages. I don't know of anything other than, there was a study a couple years ago that one of the federal kind of workplace, it wasn't OSHA, it was the NIOSH, the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health. They did a health study on health effects of frac crews being around the silica, being around the sand. That's the only study that I'm aware of that's been completed that's looked at the health effects. So the question you're asking, no one knows.
Here's a study right here.
Oh, really?
Okay.
Okay.
Study on air quality.
Okay, air quality. Well, air quality is different than health exposure.
My question is, it seems like the pipeline that's coming off, we also live in the southern end, and it seems like the pipeline is following the PP&L grid for the overhead power lines and things like that. is there any special recourse that we have, being that this is a public utility land or anything like that, or what's unique about, could anybody speak to that issue? Like what's our recourse for landowners that are against or adjacent to that right away? Does that nuance it at all?
You're in a different situation because this is an interstate or transmission pipeline which by law has eminent domain. So you're much more limited than we are in the northern tier where they're building collection lines or gathering lines to transmit it to a compressor station to put it into an interstate pipeline. So you have limited value. There's someone here who spoke to me earlier. I thought he'd speak up, but I'm not even sure I see him. But from southern Lancaster County, where they just came to him or sent him a letter and said, you know, this is happening and this is, you know, and with eminent domain, the best you really have, I think, is a strong community effort to protect your environmental treasure spots, because it seems like some of this line would go through areas that are valuable. But with eminent domain, you're more limited. Where we are, they had to buy the rights of way, and this is again what fracked the community, because the big landowners who were going to get lots of money because they own lots of land would say, yeah, you can have a pipeline. Don't put it by my house, put it over there. And it might go by a tract of homes that either they or their neighbors had sold years ago for a housing development. Not that Wellsboro has a lot, but I mean, they tend to be, you know, so whoever owned the backyard said, not in my backyard, but you can go over there. And so they zigzag around, but they're 50-foot wide permanent right-of-ways. A neighbor, a friend who's a farmer, said they push aside the dirt allegedly on one side, they do all the pipe work from the other side, push it back in, do it all, and then bring the topsoil back. Well, Tioga County has no topsoil. He had no corn because he's allowed to plant corn over. You can't plant trees, no perennials, but you can plant pasture or have pasture or corn, but nothing grew there because it was basically topsoil, I mean subsoil on the top. And when you're talking your interstate transmission lines, they're much wider. And in terms of the lady's question, periodically there are stations where they vent and test pressure and everything, and theoretically there could be some leakage, but the main leakage is where the production is done. And if you come to look at a gas compressor station and you stand where you can look against something, you see wavy lines. Is that heat or is that gas? Well, they have barbed wire fences around, so you don't know. And nobody's testing what they're emitting from those pumping stations.
I have a question here.
Well, I'm an extended family that has a cabin on Elk Lake, which is endemic. And of course, division of community, that's what happened there. We were probably the only ones that didn't sign. Of course, they went horizontal. But the question is, that's a 90-acre lake of fresh water. And I don't know that they've been drawing on it, but do you have any idea that they will draw on it?
They do drawing on the lake for the drilling of the pads. They do have, I mean, there are regulations, but, you know, like what I always say, you know, having lived in undemocratic countries too, is like it's legal, the illegality is in the law here. Other countries have laws that they just don't pay attention to. We have corruption written into the laws. So you know, there are laws about how much water withdrawal you can do, and generally they're from rivers. And they are drilling wells that they can do withdrawals, and there are timers. They're supposed to, that you see the water trucks come up, and that you see them pause, and they're only allowed to take on a certain amount, and they measure the height of the river. So I'm not aware of them drawing anything out of lakes. But I can put you in touch with somebody who would know.
But is that their purpose for surrounding this? There's a gridlock of towers all over the place.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And the question is,
where are they going to get it from?
If they can horizontal drill, why wouldn't they be able to take the water?
I think I can speak to that. My understanding of Pennsylvania law is that the state owns the water. It doesn't matter if it's in the lake or it's in a river. You as a landowner of the lake, you know, if the residents of the residents can't sell the water. What a resident could sell is access to the water. If none of the shore owners around there say they're willing to allow the company to have access to the water, the state owns the water, but the company can't access it. If one landowner provides access, and they work through, in your area, it would be the Susquehanna River Basin Commission to get permission for withdrawing the water, they would have the ability to do that, because it's the state's resource, it's not your resource.
I want to say that this goes beyond water and air, because this country does not have a national energy policy. If we had that, and second, if we had the EPA elected, separated from politics, the EPA would control this, and we wouldn't have had 50 or 60 years of destruction throughout this country.
I'm asked to announce that there is more food in the community. Where the photographs are, the photography exhibit, which is excellent. So we will have it open for however long. If you'd like to go back and have some refreshments and chat back there, it might be more comfortable than in here. There are tables and food.
Let me suggest it is after 2 o'clock. We said we would stop at 2, so we have just stopped. However, if some of you would like to remain and ask questions, I'll leave it to our panelists as to what their schedules are and whether they're willing to stay and remain. So thank you very much for coming.